Good Saturday evening. Welcome to the February 2018 forecast. It's hard to believe that we are about to enter into the third month of meteorological winter. It won't be long before we begin to see the buds on those trees and spring begins to arrive across the area. But first, we have to get through the month of February, which typically around here is one of our harsher winter months, and then going into the first couple of days of March. We're looking to go out like a lion this year. Unfortunately, for some of the people who don't want any snow or ice or any more cold weather, but winter is long from over, and we are going to go through the next few weeks with a lot of cold air to work with, a lot of storms to work with if we want snow and ice. And so odds are there that we see a lot more of winter to come as we go throughout the next month. So far, the February highlights that I have posted is that we have an MJO, which is the Madden-Julian oscillation, just another teleconnection that we use like the NAO or the AO. And this is going to be swinging into its cold phases as we go throughout the next couple of weeks, and this is going to help support colder temperatures as we go forward. The stratospheric polar vortex is going to be disrupted, and also the north to south elongation of it is going to help influence our weather around here for colder than normal temperatures, and there will be a North Pacific ridge returning, and that is also going to help drive colder weather south into our region. We'll first start out with those January anomalies so far to date. Of course, January is not over just quite yet. We still have around 5 days to go, but this is what it looks like so far. Very well below average temperatures across the central and eastern, especially the southeastern United States, where temperature anomalies are running anywhere between 4 to 6 degrees below normal. This is pretty spectacular for the month of January, especially to see these kind of anomalies that far south across portions of the U.S. Southern coast and the East Coast. So you can definitely tell that this January has been a very cold month. This is opposite of what my forecast was for it, not only back in November, but right before the month started. I did forecast above normal temperatures. Definitely that is not going to verify. We're going to see a mix of above and below normal temperatures over the next couple of days to end off and get off of the month of January. And so this map really for our region will not change that much. It won't change enough to bring above normal temperatures in by the end of the month as the overall mean for the month temperature anomalies. So it does look like I was wrong on that aspect of seeing warmer than normal temperatures, but if some of you were wanting that colder weather, it was a good month for you. We saw over a foot of snow here at my house. I know that the National Weather Service in Paducah picked up around 12.4, 12.5 inches of just all snow in the month of January, so it was a very active month to say the least. As we go through the month of February, we might be looking at a similar picture. The forecast for the MJO is to swing through phases 8, 1, and then eventually 2, and this is going to help support colder than average temperatures as we go throughout the next couple of weeks. Here's a map of what that looks like. Very complicated if you don't understand what's going on. Right here where my mouse is circling, where this big black dot is, that is indicating the current position in the Madden-Julian oscillation. We're currently in phase 5. We're about to swing into phase 6 as we go into Monday, and each one of these black dots represents another day. And so as we go into phases 7, we begin to see temperatures cooling off a little bit, and it stops forecasting right here. So as we go throughout the next couple of days, it's going to be interesting to see how far into phase 8 and phase 1, and maybe eventually phase 2 once we get later down the road into the month of February. It's going to be interesting to see how far it takes us into those phases. The further you go into them, then the more influence you get from that particular phase. So here's what those three look like. I tried to blacken them to try and outline them to make sure that you could see them. You can tell here in phase 8, which is what we will be going through first, and then we would go through phase 1 and then phase 2, is where we see typically colder than average temperatures. Now, this is also something that you can't really take to heart because we just came out of phases 3 and 4, and we were looking at well below average temperatures up until just a few days ago. So both of those support warmer than average temperatures. So it can't always be interpreted the way it actually looks. Phases 1 and 2 also support colder than average temperatures. As far as the deepening and the strength of the cold air, phase 1 is usually the strongest one. Phases 8 and 2 are just a little bit more widespread. Phase 8, you have the cold centered more in the east, whereas phase 2, it's more of a U.S., a whole continental United States, CONUS kind of code, and that's going to be something that might be happening as we go into phase 2, which would be around the middle of the month or so. The MJO precipitation anomalies typically show drier than normal conditions, but the forecast over the next couple of weeks going into these phases is the exact opposite. So we might be looking at maybe a less active pattern by the time we get towards phases 1 and 2, which would be maybe around the second to third week of February. But the first week, for sure, while we're in phase 8, is going to be very active, and that one is showing well below average precipitation. So that's just another way to show that you can't always take these the way they actually look, just kind of use them for guidance. So the way I'm using them is for colder than average temperatures, but the precipitation part, I really don't think that the signal from those is what I'm looking for. The stratospheric polar vortex is going to be elongated from north to south over the next couple of days, and this is going to help support colder risk and especially some intense shots of cold air. Here's a look at the stratospheric polar vortex. The stratosphere is just one of many layers of the atmosphere, and it just happens to be one of the lower layers of the atmosphere. So that polar vortex very close to the surface, and it is going to be moving southward over time. This is showing for the 5th of February, give or take a day or two, showing that it's centered over Canada. So with that being there, it's going to be a breeding ground for cold air. And so with that being there, any kind of storm system that moves through the continental United States is going to draw in that Arctic cold air behind it. And depending on whether that system is rain or snow can help depict even how much colder those temperatures would be after that system moves through. Looking at that North Pacific Ridge, this is something that is a big playmaker in the winter forecast, a big playmaker so far. It's been present, and that's why we've been looking at such a cold winter so far. Going into the month of February, we're seeing it relax right now, but going into the month of February, it's going to begin to return, and it's going to help produce that warm Arctic, cold eastern United States, and possibly most of the United States by the time we get later into the month. That southeast ridge, though, it still is going to be present, so we can't really get rid of the warm risk completely. So here's a look at the strong ridging in the North Pacific. This is a very positive PNA and PDO, Pacific Decadal Oscillation and North Pacific Oscillation. You can tell that we are looking at very strong ridging up there. Meanwhile, we have the very strong deepening of the trough, and that will be digging down into parts of Canada, parts of the eastern and central United States. This is the GFS model. The European model is what I just showed you a minute ago of the stratospheric polar vortex, and you could tell that it had it centered over Canada. This is at the 500 millibar level, has it centered around Canada. So they're both pretty good in agreement as far as where that polar vortex will be. And this is going to also help support an active pattern with the positive NAO, and this is, or the negative NAO, excuse me, where we see above normal temperature heights across the above normal heights across the northern Atlantic and the North Pacific helps to really create that barrier ground for that cold air. It has nowhere to go except for south into our neck of the woods, our part of the world. And right here is a look at February the 12th. You can tell that we do have that southeast ridge beginning to come into place. So that's why I think going maybe into the middle of the month, that cold air begins to maybe just relax a little bit. But notice we still have that polar vortex centered across portions of Canada. So we still will have that cold risk there. This will make a battleground, maybe some more active weather around that time as well, even though the MJO supports that we start to see a less active pattern. It depends on how strong the southeast ridge is. If it's stronger than the cold air, then we will be looking at a less active pattern going into the middle of the month. If it relaxes and we see more of that cold air regime moving in from the first week of February, lasting into the middle of the month, we could be looking at a more active pattern and then also colder than normal. So that's a big playmaker right now, or a big question. And still, the big part of this that you can probably see when you first saw the map was the strong ridging right up here in the North Pacific. Notice how much pink there is. There's a lot of strong ridging up there that's going to still help support that very cold regime moving into the continental United States. So, what you've all been waiting for, the February forecast, putting all of that together, trying to piece every little bit of it that you can into one forecast. Colder than average definitely was the theme of the entire video. You could tell that I mentioned colder than average risk more than I did warm, and the coldest periods I think are going to be centered on the beginning and the end of the month. As we go into the middle of the month, I think we begin to see that storm track relax just a little bit, and maybe some warmer temperatures in there, and that would be in support of the MJO, and also the map that I just got done showing you of that southeast ridge really trying to pump in some warm air, maybe around the middle of the month. This isn't going to be a full 30 days or a full 28 days of cold. This is going to be a month where we are going to see some swings in it, and this is always a real tricky month to forecast across our region because we begin to get towards the end of the month and our averages are already beginning to rise a little bit, so we're starting to get out of that coldest, that more harsh part of winter, and we're beginning to come into the back half, and the back half is typically the harshest around here, so it's almost not even needed to say that we're seeing those averages begin to come up a little bit. But every time that we see a warmer risk enter into the region, those temperatures are probably just going to continue to get just a little bit warmer each time we see a warmer risk. Instead of seeing 50s as our warm risk in January, once we get towards the end of the month of February, those warmer risks might introduce 60s and maybe even lower 70s, which could introduce the risk for severe weather. We had a major severe weather outbreak at the very end of the month last year in February, and we also had some colder than average temperatures in there as well. So February is always a toss-up around here. It's typically not our transition month from winter to spring. Usually that is March. But if we have a warm enough month like we did last year, it typically is our transition. This year, with me forecasting colder than average, I do not think this is going to be our transition month from winter to spring. That will come later on into the month of March. But with us getting closer to that transition period, it not only increases precipitation chances, but our forecast that I'm forecasting currently also introduces the above average precipitation chance as well. So this active pattern that we came out of January, where we saw a lot of snow, a lot of ice, a lot of rain, I recorded over 5 inches of melted precipitation of rain. That would be snow, and that would also be sleet. All of that combined, I have over 5 inches of rain, or at least 5 inches of precipitation, all melted, and that is a very active January, considering that our average is around 3.5 inches. And so going into February, typically we do see an uptick in activity just historically across the region, but this time we could be looking at even more than what is normally anticipated. So expect that active pattern to continue, expect colder than average temperatures, but let's remember, like I said, we are beginning to get closer to spring by each week, so don't be surprised or caught off guard if we see a couple of severe weather events move through every time we warm up. It's going to become a little bit more active as we get closer to March, as we draw closer to spring. But let's enjoy this last full month of winter. March typically has winter risk, but it's not typically a full month of winter with spring coming in at the same time. This is our last real full month of winter, so let's enjoy it. Don't complain about the snow and ice. We only get it for a couple of months in 1 year, and it does look like we do have higher than normal chances for that this year as well. Have a great month.